and welcome to State of the Economy, a show that connects you with prominent policymakers, thinkers and corporate leaders. Today we have with us Mr. R C Bhargava, Chairman of Maruti Udyog Limited, India's largest car company, who will speak to us on various aspects relating to the forthcoming budget, the expectations that his industry has of the budget and other issues. Mr. Bhargava is in some ways a rare specimen, I would say, because he's one person who has made a successful transition from being a bureaucrat to a successful business person. He has seen Maruti grow from scratch 2 decades, 3 decades ago. Welcome to our show, Mr.
Thank you.
Bhargava. Now, I would start with a framing question as to what do you expect of the forthcoming budget, not just for your industry, but generally for the economy? Because there's a big worry that the economy is in a slowdown, a fairly deep slowdown. What do you think can the finance minister do to raise the animal spirits, as it were, of the economy?
See, a budget is always both an economic and a political instrument. And what is required perhaps for the economy may not always be expedient from the political point of view. And particularly at this point of time, the economists would all say, look, we have to control fiscal deficit. Yeah. We have to create conditions where the economy will start moving faster. Because over the last year, there has been a steady slowdown of the GDP. Yeah. And the atmosphere generally in the country has become one where people are most reluctant to take decisions.
You mean the bureaucracy?
Bureaucracy, even the politician. Because the whole atmosphere has become a kind of chicken and egg situation. The more corruption, the more exposure of corruption, the greater the extent of suspicion. The more the suspicion, therefore the lesser willingness to take decisions. Yeah. And that situation has grown substantially in the last 12 to 18 months.
How much do you think this factor is responsible for slowing down of growth and slowing down of private investment? You made a very valid point about this lack of trust, the larger atmosphere in the country where
I think it's a major factor for slowing down what's happening in the country. There are, of course, other reasons why.
There are global factors too.
Global factors, even domestic factors in terms of slow pace of infrastructure and the general slowing down of the economy because decisions have been postponed.
And higher inflation leading to
higher inflation, higher interest rates. All of those are there. But overall, I think the biggest single factor is what is the mental attitude of the decision makers? If I am a politician and I want to take some good decisions and right decisions, but I am not confident that my decision will be not criticized by everybody that, oh, this has been done with some vested interest, some money is passed, something's happened. What do? I just don't take a decision.
So in a sense, what can the budget really do about these things?
See, the budget this time has become even more difficult because of the recent political situation which has developed, back to what has happened in the states. And the question therefore is that will the government decide to take a bold approach to the budget and do what is right for putting the economy on a growth course over the longer term? Or will it adopt a short-term, expedient measure kind of budget, thinking that, look, elections are barely 2 years away, and at this point, there's not the time to take measures which may not be popular.
So what is your guess? What do you think?
I know what I would like to happen, but I'm not sure. I don't know. To my mind, it's a toss of a coin. Which way Pranab Mukherjee goes, because Pranab Mukherjee has also to follow what the entire cabinet and the Congress party would want done.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to guess which way they're going to jump.
There's one view, Mr. Bhargava, that you're right in pointing out that the recent assembly elections in 5 states will have an impact on what kind of budget we'll get. There was one view that if the Congress had done reasonably well in Uttar Pradesh, and if Samajwadi Party and Congress were interdependent, then it would have had some positive impact at the center. But now it appears that, that the Congress is more isolated than ever, and a lot of decisions, legislative reforms which are very key, for instance, goods and services tax, the government doesn't seem to be getting enough support from other parties.
Samajwadi Party as well as the Trinamool Congress, they will now have to judge what is in their interest also. Now, possible they may take a judgment that this is in the country's interest and therefore we should go along with it, it will help us in the longer term. Yeah. They may also take the view that, look, in the short term, let's embarrass the Congress and try and get general elections done so that we come into more power in the center. Yeah. So it's a...
So there is a certain sense of unease that you also...
I think so. I feel... I mean, I can just wait till the 16th now. Yeah. But I'm not at all sure which way it's going to go.
But as you said, if the government decides to take a bold view, come up with some bold measures, irrespective of the political situation, looking at the long-term scenario, so you feel that would be more beneficial to for everybody at this stage?
I think that would be beneficial for the country. It may or may not be beneficial for the Congress party in the next elections. I think it would still be beneficial for the Congress party if in this period they can also put some measures of good governance into place, like political funding and the allocation of scarce economic resources, which have all been talked about.
And a reasonably good Lokpal.
And a Lokpal bill. If some of these measures are taken and there is a greater atmosphere created where people feel confident to take decisions, that the government will back people who do the right things, I think it could still help in the elections, because people say, at least the Congress party is now doing things.
So we'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching Rajya Sabha TV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Mr. R C Bhargava, Chairman of Maruti Udyog Limited. So we were talking about how the Congress party, the UPA, has a chance to take bold measures in the forthcoming budget and really set things right and even enhance their credibility. Now, coming back to some of the specifics of the budget, fiscal deficit, as you yourself said, is a big problem that the finance minister faces today. Now, he has to do something to correct fiscal deficit and yet also ensure that growth doesn't go off the rails. Now, one measure that they've been talking about is to raise excise duties from 10 to 12%, because these excise duties were brought down in the context of the 2008 global crisis, and to counter that, excise duties were dropped. So now the logic is to revert to mean so that government revenues don't suffer. What would you say to that?
See, we are again in a kind of slowdown situation. And I think an excise duty hike at this point would not be conducive to accelerating the economy. But the fiscal deficit problem remains. I would say that the fiscal deficit could be better tackled by reducing subsidies. So that's a huge, huge outgo on the exchequer. And long-term subsidies don't do any good to anybody, actually. Further, I think
especially subsidies which are getting delivered to the better off middle
people
class,
and which don't lead to any productive assets being created or anything like that. Further, I think the disinvestment program of the public sector, although I don't look upon it as a means of raising revenues, I look upon it primarily as a means of improving the management of the PSUs. But a secondary effect is also revenues. I think that's a route also which should be looked at, because I don't understand the policy that we will only privatize those companies which are making losses. then you get a bad price for it. And then so no, we won't privatize because we didn't get a good price. How do you expect to get a good price for loss-making companies?
But now they are disinvesting in companies which are profitable like ONGC.
But that's not disinvestment. It's 5% sale of shares is actually only a revenue-raising means. It's not a means of improving management.
Coming back to subsidies, Mr. Bhargav, this has direct link to your industry,
Sure.
the car, passenger car industry. There is a widespread opinion, which also appears rational to me, that why should diesel car owners get subsidy? Why should diesel be subsidized? Now, the moment you withdraw subsidies on diesel, it will impact the diesel car sector. Now, the other alternative that the government seems to be looking at is not to raise diesel prices, but to to impose a special excise duty on diesel cars.
That's right.
Now, which of these solutions do you think are more rational in a long-term perspective?
See, politically, in a long-term perspective, of course, the answer is that diesel prices must find its natural level, market-determined level. On the long term, there is no question. But I don't think in the short term that can be done in one go anyway. Diesel prices have to be raised, but they will have to be raised gradually because there is an impact on agriculturists, there is an impact on transportation, inflation, and it has a political aspect.
True.
So I think
that's the reason why it's not being raised.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think diesel prices will go up gradually, or should go up gradually.
Or do you think there can be a dual pricing of diesel?
Not possible.
Not possible.
As an administrative problem, it's virtually intractable.
Like the middle class diesel vehicle owners should pay a market price.
You can't determine, you can't do it.
Rural India
Can't do it.
Can't do it.
Can't do it. But logically, what you said earlier, there is no rationale why car owners using a particular fuel should be subsidized over car owners using a different fuel. There is no equity in that, there is no logic in it, and it's obviously wrong. So the only answer actually is putting an extra tax. Now, that extra tax, if it is imposed in a lump sum, would cause the industry to lose some market share. I don't know whether it's possible to impose the excise tax, but collect it in 3 installments or something like that. So that, the person obligated to pay, it becomes a kind of annual payment to the excise department by the vehicle owner. It's his obligation, whoever buys the car. And that way, I think you can meet both objectives of not subsidizing the diesel car as well as collecting the extra money which you're losing through fuel subsidy.
So this is you feel there's a more rational way of doing it?
To find a solution which is, kind of fair to both sides.
But in the long run, you do believe that diesel subsidies have to...
There's no reason all over the world, except few exceptions. Diesel and petrol are priced on the market basis. Many countries, diesel is actually costlier than petrol.
Yeah. In fact, there's one data which is quite shocking to me, which is that the under-recoveries of oil companies this year is of the order of $30 billion.
Wow.
It used to be just $10 billion 3 years ago because international oil prices have
Gone up. You have to do something about it. That's why I'm saying instead of increasing excise duty on all industrial products, why not handle these issues?
So you're suggesting that excise duty across the board need not be raised.
That's right.
So what is your view, Mr. Bhargava, on the goods and services tax as a single big tax reform in which people have expressed so much faith? Because it'll reduce cost to the industry by about 6-7%.
Like all industry, I'm also a great supporter of the GST. I wish it would come, but it's just getting postponed because of
again, lack of trust
among the states and the center.
Yeah. Somebody needs to bring.
Somebody has to bring it together, and I don't think the center should try and have more control than is absolutely necessary, Because the states have become very sensitive to their autonomy and.
What about in your interactions that you may have had with the finance minister or other ministers in the government? What is the sense that you get? Is the centre confident of building this trust with state governments and move on GST?
We've been moving on these lines, but the movement is very slow. And somebody has to say, okay, now let's sit down and just solve whatever problems there are.
Because recently I was speaking to Mr. Yashwant Sinha, who's the chairman of Standing Committee on Finance. He was suggesting that if you can't do everything together, can't bring all the states together on GST, you can start with a central GST and then move to the states. At least you have a beginning. Do you think that makes sense?
I don't think so. I think it has to be across the board to have any real impact on industrial costs.
And what do you think of the direct tax code, the complete overhauling of the tax code? Do you think it will have, it will improve the institution of the governance in regard to tax?
See, I don't know enough details about the direct tax code.
Okay.
But I feel that unless the attitude of the people implementing the tax laws, whether the existing ones or the new ones, are changed, having a new direct tax code is not going to do anything. You know how tax implementation is, the numerous stages of litigation when goes through, government has become the biggest litigator, industry has to undergo huge costs because of litigation, and most of it is again because of lack of trust.
We will come back to this. Take a small break here, don't go away, keep watching Raj Sabha television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Mr. R C Bhargava, Chairman of Maruti Udyog Limited. So we were talking about that how the budget can rationally tackle some of the difficult issues. Now, quite apart from the budget, your industry, the motor car industry, and generally the auto industry, will also get impacted by the India-EU free trade agreement which is being negotiated. I am told that once it fructifies, a lot of European car makers who don't have a manufacturing base here would be able to export the cars into India. Now, what are your views on this?
I don't think it's going to make any real significant difference. This whole agreement where we are discussing reduction of duties is for the larger cars in the luxury segment.
Because currently, I think 60% is the duty on imported cars.
Plus the CVD goes to over 100%.
Yeah, and it gets reduced by 50% once
it comes to 30%.
Yeah.
The impact of this, to some extent, might be felt by those who are doing assembly here.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I believe that in the car industry, it doesn't make much economic logic to assemble cars in small volumes. It's much better to get a CBU than to do small volume CKD operations here. And if you're really doing a manufacturing job in India, your costs are bound to be lower than...
Much lower than... So you'd still be far more competitive.
I don't think it's...
Even if at 30% somebody is trying to... So this does not...
I'm not worried on this. I don't think it's a major issue for the industry.
But do you think some of the other car manufacturers like the Hyundai and others are worried?
Even Hyundai, only those who are doing the bigger cars, above let's say 1600 or 1800 cc cars, they would be worried to an extent because there would be more competition for them. But otherwise it doesn't make any difference. They can start importing cars and wind up operations which are not economic operations here anyway.
The manufacturing sector, now the government is also trying to give a boost to manufacturing. There's a manufacturing policy which seeks to raise the contribution of manufacturing to raise it from some 16-17% of GDP to 25%. Do you think this is a realistic target, and do you think the budget, not just this budget, other budgets can give some long-term, create a long-term stable tax policy to aid manufacturing?
I think we need manufacturing growth if we're going to provide employment to people who will be entering the workforce. It's without question. We need manufacturing to sustain a higher rate of economic growth, no question. The question is how to implement it. Yes, we do need long-term, stable, transparent policies which affect the industry. More important than that, we need to know why industry in India has remained at a low level of activity. Why we are not competitive with the rest of the world? Why is China more competitive than us? The answer, I think, is the fact that in India, the government, whether it's the central government or the state government and the officers of the government, do not believe that they should in any way promote the cost reduction and competitiveness of industry. It's more a hindrance than a felicitation. And the result is it all adds to cost. Cost of time delays, cost of various compliance requirements, the cost of litigation, the whole lot of things I could name which add to cost. I think if India is going to get its manufacturing targets met, this attitude has to change.
But hasn't there been any improvement at all over the last 15, 20 years?
Probably deteriorated.
It has deteriorated.
You know, India,
Yeah.
we may not agree with this, but the World Bank rates us 132nd in
On the doing business.
business. Why? Has anybody in government analyzed this? Why are we 132? Maybe to some extent it's wrongly done. But I'm sure there are areas where we can improve to make it easier to do business. Why is it so hard to do business? Most industrialists will also agree with me that it's hard to do business in India.
And this in turn affects productivity a great deal.
Productivity, cost. Ultimately, you have to become cost competitive with anybody else in the world. China manages because it doesn't have all these extra costs. And it's just not labor laws. Huh?
Yeah.
It's much more than that.
Now, coming to labor laws, Mr. Bhargava, why is it that Indian Indian auto manufacturers, particularly over the last 4-5 years, are facing labor problems? What has gone wrong in the last 4-5 years?
I think political competitiveness has increased. The competition in the industry has increased. A lot of companies have started using large percentages of contract labor. I think having contract labor gives an opportunity to outside political parties and trade unions to intervene in that company, because I don't believe that having contract workers is a good solution to any problem. I think one should do away with that. I think managements have to realize that they have to counteract what these political parties and trade unions are trying to do. They have to educate their workers much better.
But trade unionism, Mr. Bhargava, was in decline after reforms were implemented in the early 90s, mid-90s, 2000.
Sure.
But they seem to have come back. What do you think could be the reasons for that? Are there wage pressures or?
Not so much. I think it's just political. Because people have to build vote banks. And trade unions become good vehicles for building vote banks. And there's so much more competition.
Do you need changes in labor laws?
Some changes are required, particularly in the exit policy and things of that kind. But it's more, I think, in the attitudes on both sides. I think both managements have to understand the importance of communication and building trust with the workers. And the workers have to realize that their long-term future lies actually in the industry becoming competitive, not in creating difficulties for the industry. So each are very much interdependent on each other. That realization is not existing in most places.
Thanks, Mr. Bhargava, for talking to us. That is all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you with another episode soon. Goodbye.